Good evening, everyone. We're letting people in now. Okay, so good evening. My name is Shawn Barksdale. I am the owner of Press for Time Tees, and this is a printing company that prints for a wide variety of things, but we print a lot of justice reform group merchandise, things of that nature in Virginia and abroad. I also am the host of the 10 Minutes of Truth podcast. This podcast is designed to talk about issues like justice reform, voting. Of course, we've had Liz on talking about a very important issue that we will be talking about tonight, which is ranked choice voting. Had Mr. Gates on as well, and a host of other senators, legislators, lawmakers. Very interesting is that I am a returning citizen myself. I did 14 years in incarceration, and upon my release, going back into the community, my give back was establishing a foothold in my community in a very positive way. And that's why we started that podcast and, wanted to do the things that we're doing now. Some of the things that I have been able to achieve is I got my rights back under Governor Northam, and which we know that he had put that process where you automatically could get your rights back once a few boxes had been checked off. One of those were finishing probation and parole. Once I finished probation and parole, I got those rights back. I went on my podcast to host some lawyers that talked to us about the restoration of rights and the restoration of gun rights as well. And I got my gun rights back, and I'm a violent offender. I don't say that proudly, but I was able to get that right back as well. So much so that I tell people I lost my right to vote before I gained the right to vote. I had a felony at the age of 17 years old. So I worked really hard to get those rights back. The first time I ever voted, I was 42 years old, and I voted with my daughter, my oldest daughter, for the first time. She's 18 years old. I had on the podcast today, which you guys have. We did early voting yesterday. And an issue came up that we'll be talking about on 10 Minutes of Truth podcast as well. Catch that. One of the highlights of this year is that I was also in the USA Today about the restoration of rights and how we've been fighting alongside great groups like UpVote, League of Women Voters, people of that nature. And what you will hear tonight, which is extremely important, is about, how our vote is important in ranked choice voting. That is an extremely important issue that I had a privilege of learning from Liz and other individuals as well. So hopefully we will have a great dialogue tonight. Great information will go out to everyone. I want to first introduce our first guest who has been on the 10 Minutes of Truth podcast. I think this is the third time that we've gotten together, Mr. Gates. Mr. Charles Gates is a high energy presenter, coach, and speaker. He's an MC and a community activist. His mission is to reach as many people as possible, encouraging them to become change agents. He is the second vice president of the WYJCW NAACP, a member of various grassroots organizations and movements, and self-described motivator of the people. Today, his challenge to you is to reach one, teach one. Mr. Gates, you will be talking about the value of the right to vote. The floor is yours, sir.
Our 44th presidents perhaps said it best. There's no such thing as a vote that doesn't matter. President Barack Obama. Greetings all. The value of your vote. We've heard it all. The people on this call, us collectively, we're going to vote if we haven't already. But our challenge, as Mr. Barksdale alluded to, was to reach one, teach one. What does that mean exactly? We have become so complacent that the world centers around us. We know the people in our circles may or may not exercise their rights to vote. We know that people have died, people have bled, people have fought for decades for our right as American citizens to be able to vote. But in 2024, we, ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem because we think collectively, not us on this call, of course, but those within our circle of influence. We think that things are okay. But to utter the words of one of my favorite authors, Mr. Michael Burnoff, who wrote the book, Average Sucks. The challenge with being okay is that okay is okay, as long as okay is okay. And okay is still okay if okay is okay. But okay is not okay as soon as it is not okay anymore. So what is the rub there? We as citizens, we as Virginians, we as Americans, we cannot sit and be complacent. There are people out there, organizations, structures within our own communities we may be aware of, we may not be aware of, that are trying to fundamentally change the way that we exercise our rights to vote. The electoral system, in some's opinion, is the right way to do things. For others, it's the popular vote. We're here today to talk about two different aspects of that equation. That is ranked choice voting and proportional representation. I'm not going to explain to you exactly what those two means. Over the next hour, we will talk about those two entities in detail. But what we're here to talk about today is what I alluded to in the beginning. Each one, teach one. The balance of this country, the balance of our nature, depends on you. It depends on us. Whether we have the rights to vote, as Mr. Barksdale alluded to, he lost his rights to vote. But that still does not mean that we cannot be engaged in the electoral process. Indeed, we must be engaged. And for those in our circles that come to us and say, well, my vote doesn't matter. It's only one vote. What difference does it make? They're going to do what they're going to do anyway. We disagree with that notion. Because as I heard recently in a Project 2025 education session that me and my colleagues attended, one of the speakers was asked, well, how do you retort or how do you push back on those that says my vote doesn't matter? His simple answer was this: if you don't do politics, politics will do you. Or as the founder of the Children's Defense Fund and civil rights icon, Marion Wright Edelman once said, people who don't vote have no line of credit with those who are elected, and thus pose no threat to those who act against our interest. We have a choice. We can choose to get educated and educate others, or we can choose to sit back Watch reruns of Castle and NCIS because that episode in season 2 was so good, I don't want to miss it. Or we can roll up our sleeves, put our sneakers on, hit our exercise before we do the inevitable, which is hit the streets, hit social media, hit the schools, hit the senior citizens facilities, hit those places that you know the people inside need us to educate them, not to persuade them who and who not to vote for, but to educate them on the ways to vote. Taking them to the polls, physically taking them in the car and say, let's go. Assisting them in the voter process. And at the end of the day, remembering that old Nike slogan, just do it. And for all of us, we heard these words mentioned a few weeks ago. Do something. That something is to influence those within your circle of influence and those outside your circle of influence. And do something. Reach one, teach one. Back to you, Mr. Barksdale.
Mr. Bring the Zing himself. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Y'all picked that book up too. Really quick, something that you said before we bring Liz up is you spoke about that boots on the ground effect, picking people up, getting them to the polls. I found out today that my great-grandmother, she was one of the first women, and I'm from a small rural town here in Virginia, that she was one of the first women to have her driver's license. And that's what she did. She made sure she picked up all of the people to get them to the polls. You know, so I found that extremely interesting. And I'm glad that you said that and shared that, you know, we're going to have to get off the couch for work like this. You know what I'm saying? So thank you. Thank you so much. I'm waiting on this. We had Liz White on the 10 Minutes of Truth podcast back earlier this year, and she wowed us, and she will all of you about, and she is from UpVote Virginia. And the way she's going to teach us about ranked choice voting is exceptional. I'm not going to even wait any longer. Please give us that overview, Liz White, on ranked choice voting.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Thank you for the gracious introduction. I had a great time on your podcast. I encourage everybody to check out that episode and all of the episodes. I am in the unenviable position of following Mr. Charles Gates and his incredible words. And I just hope that I can take the sentiment that he expressed about the value of our vote, the value of our participation in our democracy and the world around us, and draw a bright line to the kinds of reforms that UpVote Virginia and More Equitable Democracy and people in this space work on, and talk about how having your vote means even more if we can continue to evolve our democracy to have fuller, more thorough, more accurate representation of the voters. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So what is ranked choice voting? Before we move on too much further, we're going to do a quick 101 overview. I'm going to mostly be talking about what's called instant runoff voting, and that is in an election with one winner. So we are either nominating or electing a delegate, a senator, a president, a congressman, an election like that. So ranked choice voting, as UpVote Virginia likes to say, is a simple change to the ballot that enables better voter experience, better campaigns, and ultimately better government. All it means for voters is that instead of just having one choice when you fill out your ballot, instead of just getting to pick your one favorite, you get to have a more thorough expression of your preference. You get to say, this is my first choice, but this is my second choice, this is my third choice, and so on. You do not have to rank, but you have the option. So in a single winner election, the best representation that we can get for the electorate is to make sure we're nominating or electing someone who has support from the majority of voters, 50% plus one. We want to cross that 50% threshold. Right now, we mostly have plurality elections, which just means if you get the most votes, you win, which seems okay until you look a little closer and you realize that some of these very crowded electoral fields, especially in the primaries in Virginia, you can have 10, 12, 15 people running in a field, and someone can mathematically win an election with 15% of the electorate, 25% of the electorate. And all we know from those election returns is that 75, 80, 85% of the electorate preferred someone else. So ranked choice voting is designed to identify that candidate who has support from the majority of voters. So here's how it works. We're going to count up all of the first choice votes that people have cast. If somebody has cleared that majority threshold, everybody gets to go home early. Or if there's only two people in the race, we don't need ranked choice voting for a two-person race. Someone's mathematically going to clear that threshold. But in these crowded fields, that becomes increasingly less likely. So we're going to count them all up. If no one has cleared that 50% threshold, we're going to take the candidate who got the fewest first choice votes and we're going to eliminate them. Then we're going to start it all over again. We're going to count everything again for round two. If your candidate, your first choice candidate, was the one eliminated, now your vote's going to count for your second choice. You get to stay in the conversation. And that process is going to continue. It's a series of instant runoffs until we've identified a candidate with that majority support. So I'm going to just go back through that with pictures because I find that that's easier. So let's say we have a 4-candidate field. And in Virginia, again, that's usually a primary, but not always. So a 4-candidate field, we're going to say turquoise has about 44% of the win. We're used to a plurality election, a traditional election where we'd go, all right, in a 4-person field, that's pretty good. Turquoise wins, that's fine. But all we know from these returns is that 56% of voters wanted someone else. We don't know anything about turquoise. Turquoise might be a consensus builder who's going to, who everyone else is okay with, or maybe they are polarizing and they are the kind of person that you either rank first or you don't want anywhere near elected office. We don't know. With ranked choice voting, we're going to get more information. We're going to eliminate dark purple. They thank them for their service, thank them for throwing their hat in the ring. They got the fewest votes. We're going to eliminate them. We're going to reallocate those voters' votes to their next choice. And here's how that shakes out. So now turquoise is almost at that majority threshold. He's almost at that 50% line. Clearly, almost half the voters are okay with turquoise, but not quite there yet. We don't have quite enough information. We're going to eliminate orange and see what happens. And in this scenario, there was enough overlap. Turquoise appealed to different sets of voters. Turquoise probably had to campaign outside their comfort zone and build coalitions and appeal to different kinds of voters to get those second and third place rankings. But they cleared that 50%, and that's the kind of candidate you want. That's the kind of candidate that ranked choice voting is going to elect. Ranked choice voting is a pretty new conversation in Virginia. It's not a new conversation nationally. Utah's been using ranked choice voting since the 90s, Maine, Alaska. Usually I have a map when I talk for longer, but there's cities and counties and states all over the country who have been doing ranked choice voting for years. There are places all over the world who've been using ranked choice voting for over a century. So while it's a new idea here, it's not a new untested idea. But in Virginia, I think it's an especially pertinent conversation now because our politics in general, federally and at most levels, are so polarized. Our tribalism and our team sport kind of approach to politics is so strong, and the incentives for both voters and elected officials are so skewed that compromise is dangerous, that pragmatism is difficult, that actually finding solutions to problems becomes harder to cross that divide. So it's an especially important tool now. And the other problem it solves for shouldn't be a problem at all. And that's just more people throwing their hat in the ring, more candidates in a race, more people are stepping up to run for political office. That should just be good news for voters. That's more choices for voters. That's more brain power on the problems that face us. That's more perspectives, more voices in the conversation. And we should have an electoral system that can handle that rather than punishing voters for having too many choices. Really quick before I pass it along to the rest of our panel, in Virginia, the only current ranked choice voting legislation on the books was passed in 2020. It was patroned by Delegate Sally Hudson, and it allows cities and counties to pass an ordinance to use ranked choice voting for their city council or board of supervisors elections. It's narrow, it's a pilot program. Arlington County is about to be using ranked choice voting for the third time under this bill. And Charlottesville, the city of Charlottesville, has just passed an ordinance to use ranked choice voting in their primaries next year. So we're building, and we'd like to see more options for localities. We'd like to see localities have flexibility to use that in any local or constitutional election. And we'd love to give parties the power to opt in to use ranked choice voting for their primaries. So that's where we are in Virginia. I'm going to pass the window back to Shawn. And again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A box, and we'll circle back around at the end of the program. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Liz. It's an understatement that she definitely needs more than 5 minutes. It is so much information. Like I said again, shameless plug, 10 Minutes of Truth podcast. You can get the entire segment of this. We have a Colin Cole, Director of Advocacy, Outreach and Comms, More Equitable Democracy. Today, Mr. Cole will be talking about the benefits of proportional representation. How are you, Mr. Cole?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me here. I'm really stoked to be here.
Absolutely.
So hello, everyone. My name is Colin Cole. I am the Director of Policy, Outreach, and Communications at More Equitable Democracy. More Equitable Democracy, I'm bringing up my screen here, is a racial justice organization that focuses on electoral systems reform as a means of changing the conditions that allow more jurisdictions to advance racial justice policies. So I'm going to give a quick overview of basically what proportional representation is in theory and why my organization, More Equitable Democracy, who's done a lot of work on redistricting and systems work, has decided that this is a priority for us. And I'm going to frame that to you in a metaphor about choosing a meal. What's for dinner? We have to make choices about how we want ourselves to be represented every day, but we also have to make choices about things like what we want to eat as a big group. So imagine that we have a slate of options here. You've got shrimp enchiladas, you've got pepperoni pizza, you've got a Kahlua pig plate, you've got barbecue, you've got steak, you've got kind of an uninspiring iceberg lettuce salad, and maybe you have falafel. These are some options that we could choose from. And how we choose what we want to eat as a group matters. But also what matters is if we're just choosing one thing, like what Liz was talking about, a mayor, an executive, a governor, a member of Congress, or a city council, something that is supposed to have multiple options that everyone can choose from. We're going to talk a little bit about this in the context of election systems. So an election system really is made up of three parts. There's the formula, that's how the winner's determined. There's the constituency, that's which voters are represented by which leaders, and there's the ballot structure. How do voters express themselves? And I would like to ground our conversation today first by talking about constituency, talking about which voters elected leaders represent. Because this question of constituency is really at the heart of the Voting Rights Act in the United States. And I'm going to use sort of a case study because it's relevant to some of the later speakers, looking at Portland, Oregon. So this map is now outdated. It's from the year 2018, but it shows where people of color live in Portland. Portland has a reputation for being a super white West Coast city, but it's actually not so lily white. 1 in 4 voters in Portland is a person of color, and closer to a third of the population, total population, are people of color. And you can see where people of color in Portland live. They tend to live in these yellower areas that are hotter on the heat map, and these areas that are more ice blue is where it's mostly white folks, and then the sort of greens are in between. But even those really hot spots, you'll notice nothing gets into a place where it's really majority people of color. There's a lot of places that are hovering about 50%. And why is this important? This is why we're going to talk about the Voting Rights Act. So folks are probably familiar, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it fundamentally transformed representation in this country. There are cities and counties and states where, as a direct result of legal action brought under the Voting Rights Act, those bodies were able to be transformed, and communities that for too long were left out were able to get representation in government. And that matters, and that's meaningful. And the Voting Rights Act had 2 main components. Section 5, which was the pre-clearance section, and Section 2, which had to do with legal challenges. Section 5 about pre-clearance, this is what has recently been gutted back in 2013 in Shelby v. Holder. But this is what basically proactively limited you from making changes to your electoral systems if you were a jurisdiction that had a history of racialized campaigns, voter disenfranchisement, voter roll purges, and voter suppression tactics. Section 2, which still exists today, is the actual mechanism through which we can challenge bad systems. Now, this system is still being gutted. There have been cases that have weakened this section, made it harder to litigate, but it still exists. But how Section 2 is litigated is not perfect. Basically, it requires 2 conditions to be met. The first is what's called a racially polarized voting pattern. A racially polarized voting pattern means that people of color or a protected class are voting differently than white folks. That it's not just a matter of, say, income and wealth or political party, but that there is a meaningful distinction by race. That's not too hard of a standard to hit. There's racially polarized voting in most of the country. But this second provision that comes from a 1981 Supreme Court decision is what can be the sticky wicket. And this is the legal term, the legal jargon here. To file litigation under Section 2, you must show that there's geographic concentration of a protected class sufficient to constitute the creation of a majority-minority district. And what that means is you need to show that the group that you're trying to represent are concentrated enough, that is segregated enough in one part of the city that you could draw a district wherein that group is the majority. Now, why is this a problem? The reason it's a problem is because although that offers a pathway forward to meaningful representation in many communities in the United States, it doesn't for all communities. This is sort of at the heart of our system of winner-take-all elections, where the largest group has the ability to win all of the representation. So if you're in a community where you can draw that district, where people of color are in the majority and they have the power to win their fair share of seats, then you have a path forward. But if you are in a jurisdiction like Portland, where there isn't one district where you can draw to have the majority of people in one of those districts be people of color, then all of a sudden that doesn't offer a path forward. We partnered with some mathematicians at the group called the Metric Geometry and Gerrymandering Group to try to figure out if there was a path forward for creating a district to present a path for people of color to have the ability to elect their fair share of candidates. And the answer is maybe surprising. If you wanted to, under their old 5-district map, draw a district that had as many people of color as possible, this was the district you could draw. And it's 34% people of color, which is not enough to meet that legal standard under the Voting Rights Act. So even though there's racially polarized voting in Portland, they have no protection under the Voting Rights Act because they can't create a map. If you expanded the city council from 5 to 7, you still can't draw a map wherein they have protection, because this map is only 36.3%. They would need to be more than 50% of the population to have legal protections under the Voting Rights Act. If you went to 9 districts, you still cannot draw a district that gives people of color in Portland protections under the Voting Rights Act, because these are all frameworks within a winner-take-all system that requires that majority threshold, and that we found often is the barrier. So going back to our what's for dinner example, let's say that we decided to draw districts. Well, if the minority of this population, the statistical minority, is vegetarians, if you're a vegetarian and you live in District 1 or District 2, the way these districts have been drawn, you don't actually have a candidate to vote for. Neither of those candidates speak for you. The only candidate that you can cast a ballot to help represent you is if you're in District 4. And even then, if you're a minority of the population there, you're probably going to lose to barbecue. And maybe there's this district here where, you can elect salad, but it's sort of an uninspiring candidate. They win by default. They're running unopposed. And this is also something that we find happens all the time in our elections. And when we constrain ourselves to just voting by geography, anytime you have a group that you want to be represented that lives outside of the area where you're trying to increase representation, you're fundamentally constrained by geography. And that is what makes the case essentially for proportional representation, focusing on that electoral formula. Because systems of proportional representation aren't as required to be constrained by geographic boundaries. Under proportional systems, if you're 1/4 of the community, like these gentlemen who look like Mike Pence are, you can win about 4 in 10 seats on city council, but you're no longer going to win all of them. And if you're this group of yellow, whereas traditionally under a winner-take-all system, you would win 0 of 10 seats, well, now, because you're 1/10 of the voting population, you have the power to win 1 of those 10 seats at the table at city council. This is sort of the context that was being considered in Portland, Oregon, when they chose to reform their electoral system a few years ago. And some of our guest speakers tonight from Portland are going to talk about the change that they chose to make to their city and why it's helpful for the communities that they're working in. So, Shawn, I'm happy to pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin. That's a lot of information to really unpack. One of the questions that I have really quick, Liz, will these slides be available after the Zoom?
Yes, we can do that. We're recording tonight, so everyone behave.
Okay.
We're recording. We will share the recording, and we can. Speaking certainly for myself, we'll share the slides, and all
Okay,
the relevant
beautiful.
links from the chat as well.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Really quick before we move on to our next guest, because that was a great job, Colin. Thank you so much. I'm very intrigued about that information to actually learn a lot more and how it represents us as a whole, but my community as well. Really quick, Liz, about I just have a question that kind of aligns with what he has. Can you just explain just a little bit how ranked choice voting eliminates the voting, the splitting of the vote for candidates?
I'm so glad you asked. That's actually a great segue. Our next speaker, unfortunately, fell ill today. Tamaya Dennard from Represent Women is sick, and I'm really sorry that you all are missing out on her because she's tremendous, and I am a poor substitute for her presentation. But I do want to hit a couple bullet points. In the chat, I'm sharing a memo that Represent Women put out. Their mission is gender and racial parity in representative politics. And they put out a memo a few months ago directly connecting ranked choice voting, all kinds of ranked choice voting, to the results they wanted to see. Let me share my screen one more time, and I'm just going to hit some really quick bullet points. But one of them is what you just asked about, Shawn. So I'm sorry to hijack. You set me up so beautifully.
No.
So the benefits of ranked choice voting are many, and one of the ones we always talk about is that ranked choice voting benefits more non-traditional candidates, and that kind of big bucket term means mostly women and people of color. Sometimes we also talk about younger candidates or newer candidates as well, but for this purpose, we're going to be talking about women and people of color. So the other benefits of ranked choice voting all kind of add up to present these opportunities. So the ones I want to talk about really quick, the first one is what Shawn just talked about, how ranked choice voting eliminates vote splitting and what we call, the spoiler effect. We all hate spoilers, and that's true in our elections as well. So I think we see all the time that people are told to wait their turn. They're looking to throw their hat in the ring. They're looking to step up and run for office. And they are told by the powers that be, either we already have someone, you have to wait your turn, or they're told we already have someone like you. And that might mean a demographic similarity, a geographic similarity, an ideological similarity. But the fear in a plurality election is that if you have two candidates who are similar in some way, they're going to split a crucial voting block. And both of them could lose as a result. So getting in a race where there's already someone similar in some way might just end up hurting that whole voting block and their interests. In ranked choice voting, you can have as many people as you want who share, again, a demographic background, an ideological background, a geographic background. And if the voting block that wants that kind of candidate is big enough, they will have more choices and the votes will eventually coalesce on one of those candidates. And that voting block will get the representation that they should have, rather than kind of cracking the vote and having neither candidate win. You also don't get the spoiler effect, right? I mean, we don't generally talk about ranked choice voting in a presidential general election, but I think it's a really clear example of the spoiler effect. Every presidential election, in modern history, there's a Ross Perot, a Ralph Nader, a Jill Stein, a Gary Johnson, pick your third party candidate, who have every right to be in that race. But the plurality system that we have means that if you vote for that third party, you're either really casting a vote for the candidate you don't want, or you're wasting your vote, throwing away your vote. And you should be allowed to vote for the person who appeals to you. But they end up being a spoiler in a lot of cases, and someone ends up winning the presidency without a majority. So again, we're not necessarily talking about ranked choice voting in the presidential election, but I do think it's a very clear illustration of that spoiler problem. The other benefit of ranked choice voting that directly ties into making the path a little easier for women and people of color is the decrease in negative campaigning. Ranked choice voting takes away the incentive to attack your opponent. Why would you attack your opponent if what you really need is your opponent's supporters to rank you second? Just in case that opponent is eliminated before you need that group of voters to say, well, I really love Shawn, but Liz isn't so bad. We'll rank Liz second. So if Shawn is eliminated first, I get all those votes. But if I had gone to them and told them what a jerk I thought Shawn was, they're going to go, well, maybe she's nowhere in my rankings actually, and I miss out. So it is much, much more beneficial to me as a candidate to build consensus and not engage in that negative campaigning. Women and people of color are disproportionately affected by negative campaigning. It tends to be more personal. It also more often affects the initial decision to enter the race at all. So if we can just lower that threshold a little bit and eliminate the terrible campaign ads that we all hate, it's a win-win, really. And then the last one is that there is recent data that has come out that does show that voter turnout is increased by ranked choice voting. People just feel like they've got more of a voice. It's more likely that someone has come and knocked on their door and engaged them and let them feel like a real part of the system. And there's just more options for them who actually have a shot at winning. So those are kind of the three overall benefits of ranked choice voting that add up to just a more level playing field and a more friendly environment for women and people of color looking to run for office. So I'm going to hand that back to you, Shawn. Again, thank you for setting me up for that. I encourage you to check out the report. I also encourage you to check out Represent Women. They are a spectacular organization, and we'll have to have Tamaya or someone else from them on our next webinar.
Liz, if I may, I have a graphic handy from that report that that you mentioned. Show it, folks, real quick, because I think it's very neat. It shows basically that ranked choice voting makes a difference. So this is looking at the 4 Bay Area cities that use ranked choice voting: Oakland, California, Berkeley, San Leandro, and San Francisco. And it compared their elections before RCV and after, as well as other Bay Area cities and what they saw in the same time after those places adopted ranked choice voting. And you can see that the number of candidates of color goes up significantly. And the same is true for the number of women who are winning office. And part of the sort of conclusion of the research is that, unfortunately, because of systemic racism and institutional sexism and misogyny, oftentimes, as we all know, when you have 2 equal candidates and one is white and one is black, a lot of voters will default to supporting the white candidate. And if you have 2 equal candidates and one's a woman and a man, a lot of voters will unfortunately default to just supporting the man. And so when you adopt a system that makes who your second choice is matter, those candidates that are disproportionately relegated to second choices end up seeing this big benefit. So just thought I would show that graphic.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Glad you had that on hand.
Great information. I mean, great information. And to just, sum up what these 2 individuals have told us is that ranked choice voting, it keeps your moral compass in place. That's what it does. You don't have to, downgrade anyone. You don't have to belittle anyone. It keeps everybody's moral compass right where it needs to be. And it holds everybody accountable. So thank you for sharing that, to both of you. I've been waiting on this individual right here because I've been hearing about Portland. So Miss Jenny Lee, Portland PRCV campaign. Tonight, she will be speaking about maximizing representation, the Portland path. How are you, Jenny?
Great. Thank you so much, Shawn. So hello again. My name is Jenny Lee. I'm the Deputy Director at the Coalition of Communities of Color, and we're an alliance of culturally specific organizations based in Portland, Oregon. We work on racial justice and equity issues both locally and statewide. So we have been working on various democracy-related issues for some years now, as our member organizations have moved us in that direction. We recognized one of the biggest opportunities we had is to pass proportional representation through some government reform processes starting a few years ago. So we recognized key issue is that Portland was drastically in need of better representation. So for over a century, we have had a system of 5 council members elected at large. That's in a city of 600,000. And we knew that Portlanders did not feel represented. For example, we had only had 2 individuals from the east part of the city be elected in until 2020. We know that lack of representation translated into things like underinvestment or policy priorities not getting addressed. So for example, East Portland having the highest rate of pedestrian and traffic deaths. We've also seen a shifting population where because of displacement and gentrification that many historical communities of color have also been moved throughout the city. So based on this, we decided to take advantage of an opportunity through a charter review process to conduct extensive community engagement with many of our member organizations and find out what are alternatives for a more representative democracy. So we worked with 10 different cultural communities, as well as youth, people experiencing housing instability, to talk about what representation meant for them, and also then conducted a second part to this workshop series to understand what kind of system felt like it would work for them. And it turned out that that did include people did not feel represented. They didn't know there was someone they could talk to in City Hall. They had never seen one of their elected officials, and felt like ranking was a positive strategy in order to have more choices in who got elected, and also to feel more represented by being able to vote their true preferences. So we worked through that process and shrinking it down to the briefest highlight that through the charter process, community engagement and organizing, and then our ballot measure campaign, we won with 58% of the vote in November 2022 to move to a proportional ranked choice system with districts. So creating 4 districts with 3 members each representing them. And we are now in the thick of voter education efforts, since we know the work doesn't end after we win a ballot measure, but implementation has been a very all-encompassing priority of ours, especially looking at folks who were least represented and those who we've prioritized throughout this process. First, we have worked with the city of Portland and aligned with their voter education strategies, and we're able to secure a community-oriented grant opportunities to fund culturally specific and other community-based organizations to reach more voters. We've also embarked on our own large-scale voter education effort and have found that people are really excited and they're already engaging organically. There are small grassroots groups that we've never even heard of that are putting on their own workshops, requesting resources, having speakers come there. So we'll continue that at the kind of organized level, but we're also getting out and starting to have opportunities for events, conversations, and canvases, and seeing that people are really captivated by the idea of having more choices, a greater voice in City Hall, and increased representation. So we have over 100 candidates on the ballot because everybody is up for election this first cycle. And we've also seen changes in how people are campaigning. So first off, among the kind of front runner candidates, so the strongest people running the strongest campaigns, there is a greater diversity of particularly folks of color, other underrepresented backgrounds, people coming from sort of non-traditional backgrounds to politics that would not have run if they had had to run citywide, but it's really this system has helped make that possible. We're also seeing candidates working to appeal to a broader range of people. They're forming alliances both within their districts and across districts, and not seeing the same kind of negative campaigning in the past. But what's really interesting is that doesn't mean they're just running to the middle or a sort of bland centrist, but they're actually running so that they can appeal to a strong constituency of supporters. That's for a proportional component of this system, but then that's also translating into folks having a broad appeal. So being able to talk to a lot of voters, because even if they're not someone's first choice, being their second or third choice for a voter really matters. So that's been exciting to see both this happen and change the dynamic broadly, but also people are having real conversations on the doors. Again, to that point, people who had not ever been reached out to, now they're hearing from candidates. And so I'll finally just wrap up that say, as you've heard from other folks, it's been borne out even with our local public opinion research, both focus groups and polling, that people actually like the idea of having multiple elected officials represent them and having rankings, because they are able to vote for people who come from different varieties of backgrounds, policy perspectives, experiences, and ideas. So we're hopeful that we will see this bear out in the elections result, that people will vote for people just beyond those who that they identify with, but recognize they're voting for elected officials to represent their neighbors, their friends, their families, and be more open to that in the ranking process to bring a wider, more inclusive opportunity for representation to City Hall this November. So thank you.
Wow. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jenny. Before we get into our last speaker, some of the things that I took from you, Jenny, that we spoke about on RCV, as well is you said how people are campaigning differently, right? So with that, what I understood was that it brings about a different caliber of legislator, right? One of the that collaborates on problems. This is what Leah spoke about before. They problem solve differently, and it incentivizes, right, to problem solve and to be accountable to the people they serve. That's what she was talking about, like the percentages and things. So it actually changes the culture of how we vote, RCV. So thank you so much for that information. Thank you. Last but not least, of course, we have Elizabeth Melson, former president of the FairVote Virginia, candidate for state senate. And she will be talking about the journey to RCV. Welcome, Elizabeth. Please educate us.
All right, thank you. So I'm also a formerly incarcerated person. Wow. In 2005, 2006, I was arrested and convicted of a federal drug charges. I struggled with addiction and alcohol abuse. I was sentenced and incarcerated for 50 months. I went through county jails, federal prisons, the federal prisons drug program, work release jail, and was finally released on 12/31 of 2009, and returned to real world and went straight into grad school. Now, backing up to when I was in the storm of this conviction and really learning about the consequences of what I was going through, there was really something that hit hard about losing my right to vote. It's very dehumanizing. It's, you feel less than. You are not a citizen anymore when you're disenfranchised from those civil rights. So at the time, Virginia was one of 4 states that permanently disenfranchised ex-felons. So not only was I feeling grief and mourning this loss of rights, it was like it was never going to come back to me. I was never going to be a full citizen again. And luckily, I don't think laws really changed, but policy changed in Virginia. And I was eventually able to get my rights restored. And that rights restoration played a major role in my civic engagement and ultimately advocacy for election reform. And so some of you may know that I believe it was in 2014, Governor McAuliffe changed the process to allow ex-felons an expedited process to request restoration of rights. And then later on, there was some controversy about some mass movements that he did to restore rights. But in that first, they put up a website and people were encouraged to apply. And I went through that process. I gathered up my paperwork from my probation, from my conviction, and you turn it all in and you apply through the website. And it took me something like 9 months or a year later. And in 2015, I finally got a letter after a few calls and checking, the website and calling into the governor's office phone number for rights restoration. And I got a letter signed by LeVar Stoney. He worked for the governor at the time. that said my rights were restored. And that's the right to vote, the right to serve on a jury, the right to run for office and become a notary. And as Shawn said, there's a separate process for restoring guns rights, firearms rights. And I eventually did that too, but that's not really part of this story. This story is about how my restoration of rights had led me to become, my interest in ranked choice voting, starting a advocacy organization to get that passed in Virginia, and eventually run for office. And how that happened was in 2015, when I got that letter, the first thing I did was like, what's the next election? And the next election was, I think, a Republican primary in my district. And so I did my due diligence. I went online. I learned about the few candidates that were running, and I went and voted for the first time since Al Gore was running, 2000, I believe. And then the next presidential election, 2016. And, I had no idea where I fell. I didn't know if I was a Republican, if I was a Democrat, if I was an independent. So I filled out one of those really long questionnaires online, and I aligned more with the independents and the minor party candidates running, because they were talking about prison reform and programming and cannabis legalization and things that resonated with me, getting us out of forever wars. And they were also talking about election reform. This is the place where I first heard about ranked choice voting. I think Jill Stein was talking about it. And so I was proud of my right to vote. It was dear to me. It was something that was taken away, and I had to jump through hoops to restore it. And then how dare somebody tell me that I was going to waste my vote if I voted for Jill Stein? So to bring it back to what Liz was saying. So when I learned about ranked choice voting and how it is a solution for vote splitting and for, gave us more a way to fully express our preferences, because, you look at, 4 or 5 candidates and you go, well, I really like that one. But I also kind of like these policies and the things that candidate's talking about. And to be able to express that, to go to the ballot and rank those, was just so appealing to me. And as a way to never be told again that I was wasting my vote, it was especially appealing. So after I learned about ranked choice voting, I started following FairVote National. I went to I think it was 2017. We went to Philadelphia and we talked about election reform with Green Party, with FairVote, with some minor parties, with some other organizations. And I came back and I started talking to my delegate, and he actually entered a bill that was ranked choice voting from local office all the way up to governorship, I believe. And then it started. Then from there on, I was going to the General Assembly every year. I got linked up with other people that were interested in ranked choice voting. We formed FairVote Virginia, the state chapter of FairVote. And then, Liz picked it up when she was talking about the timeline of the legislation in Virginia, where in 2020, it was passed for localities. And our organization started working closely with UpVote when they transitioned from redistricting to other reforms. I was the president of our chapter from 2019 to 2023 when I ran for office, and we fully passed the baton on to UpVote and encouraged our followers to continue working with UpVote. So, I don't want to ramble or rush, but my journey, it was really through rights restoration that led me to ranked choice voting, because, I was once told that very precious right, I was wasting it by choosing an independent or a minor party candidate. And ultimately I ran for, last year I ran for Virginia State Senate in District 28 as an independent, long shot. But I was able to talk about the things that are important to me. So I was able to talk about more meaningful programming in the criminal justice system and election reforms and getting big money out of politics and all those things that the legacy candidates were not talking about. Thank you.
You're a superhero, Elizabeth. Let me tell you that. You're a superhero. I know. I know. Thank you so much for those powerful words. Before we close out, we want to take any questions that our audience may have. I know that while we may be waiting, Miss Allen will be taking those with me. Really quick about ranked choice voting. Our active governor that we have now, was he elected with ranked choice voting?
Why, Shawn, I'm so glad you asked. Virginia has a really interesting recent history with ranked choice voting. It tends to be any legislation, the 2020 legislation, some of the legislation that we've tried to move in the years since have tended to pass, if not on party lines, close on party lines, mostly supported by Democratic lawmakers, but a lot of the most prominent use of ranked choice voting in the Commonwealth have been in Republican primaries, most notably the 2021 unassembled convention in which Governor Youngkin, Lieutenant Governor Sears, and Attorney General Meares were nominated, leading to the first elected statewide Republicans in 12 years. And I think there were a few reasons for that, but mostly they're things we've talked about. There was less negative campaigning. It was disincentivized. So Governor Youngkin and the rest of the ticket got to really emerge from that primary process unscathed with a united, excited party behind them. Governor Youngkin's favorable ratings were a lot higher. His unfavorables were a lot lower than former Governor McAuliffe, who emerged from a traditional primary on the left, pretty battle worn. Again, there's no one right way to do anything, but the incentives are different. And I think they were one team, right? The team sports of politics. One team had an advantage coming out of those nominating contests. And in a purple close state like Virginia, that kind of thing matters. So yes, the current, all three statewide officials were nominated using ranked choice voting, as were four congressional candidates and a member of the House of Delegates.
Wow. Any questions? Ms. Allen, do we have any questions yet? Anybody have any questions? No questions yet? Well, I have one more question before I let all of you go. What's the reality of ranked choice voting? Where are we at right now with having this as an option here in Virginia?
So we're moving the ball down the road. I think momentum is an important factor here. No one wanted to be first. I will applaud Arlington over and over for being the locality to say, we'll do it. We'll go first in Virginia. We'll try it. And to continue to build on that success. Charlottesville, I applaud them for picking up the baton as well. We are UpVote. I can only speak for our work, but we're doing educational work and building up grassroots support and moving the ball down the road in several other localities, and working with legislative allies to, again, some education on that end as well, because it is, as you've seen, this wide-ranging issue, but hoping to make some common sense expansions to existing laws and to just provide other optional scenarios where parties or localities could use ranked choice voting when it makes sense for them.
Nice. Before we leave, any housekeeping items for Liz, Taj?
I will send out the recording of this. I've made myself a big list of links to include of the slides that we can collect. So we'll make sure that everyone who was on the call, and again, thank you so much for sharing your Wednesday night with us. But we'll make sure you all have these things at your fingertips. You will be able to share this evening with people in your network. And then anyone who couldn't attend will be sharing this with other legislators, we'll be sharing this with other community partners, potential coalition members. So this is just a matter of getting the word out, because I hope that you have seen the more you learn about ranked choice voting, the more sense it makes. So the more folks we can bring into the fold, the better. So yes, we will get you all of this recording and all of the supporting documents and information as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our guests. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to our generous hosts, Liz from UpVote Virginia, of course, Taj from the Humanization Project, my brother. Thank you all, and y'all have a great evening.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you.